Welcome to Veggies Farm Game. We continue to cover some medieval warfare topics in the light of Veggie Knights and PvP release. Let's talk about medieval infantry today. We will shed some light on what an organized infantry is, what is the difference between infantry and cavalry, organized infantry cost, recruitment, and supplies that are needed to maintain organized infantry units, how well infantry performed and why it has not replaced cavalry. Before we start, please subscribe to our channel to receive fresh updates about Veggies Farm NFT game and different giveaways that we are running. Also like this video, as it helps to spread it to wider audience. So, what's an infantry? Infantry is a type of army that perform military actions while being dismounted, which means not on top of the horse. However, there were many cases when knights' cavalry were fighting dismounted. Does it mean that dismounted cavalry transformed to infantry in such cases? No. Dismounted cavalry is still a cavalry, disregarding the fact that it fights on foot. Because the main tool to achieve a victory for such units is a combination of human and horse. Cavalry doesn't stop to be a cavalry, even during performing some tasks dismounted. And vice versa, dragoons for example are an infantry, disregarding the fact that they spend majority of time on top of the horse, performing marches, etc., but they start the battle on foot, and are a typical infantry unit. This is like modern motorized infantry units, except for their mobility tools, dragoons used horses instead of modern vehicles. So, infantry is a type of army that performs their military actions on foot, including march, maneuver, battle, flanking, etc. All these actions are performed on foot, while this military units could arrive to place of battle using horses for example. Infantries have a lot of advantages. Infantry does not require horses, as we know. That allow to make a price of each infantry warrior cheaper. Because the horse price consists not only of initial price to acquire a horse. Many funds should be spent on horses' maintenance, including food and equipment on top of that. That's why you could make much more infantry than cavalry for the same price. This means it will become a great power because of a raw amount. On top of that, the time to prepare an infantryman is significantly smaller than to train a horseman. For example, knights were trained from child ages, like from age of 6, and after about 10 years they were ready to be used as some military power. Knights, in general, were training during entire life to master their skills. Therefore, if you lose one horseman during battle, it was already considered as a huge loss. Good infantryman could be trained during about a half of year. So, it's much easier to replace infantryman than a horseman. On top of that, there's a huge number of cases when it's impossible to use horses. For example, during fortress assault or assault of fortified towns. That's why you would need an infantry or dismounted cavalry to perform such military action. That are infantry advantages in general. Taking all this into account, we may conclude that infantry is always cheap to recruit, and cavalry is always expensive. That conclusion is wrong, however. The problem here is infantryman is only a part of an infantry unit. For infantry units to perform well on a battlefield, you should have a big amount of people in your units. And by saying big amounts, we mean huge amounts. And all that huge amounts should be kept in warm barracks, supplied with food and equipment, because an infantryman is not a knight. Infantryman can't self-supply himself with food and needed equipment on appropriate level. Infantry units should be constantly trained and supplied with salary. Otherwise they will just leave and find another job for themselves. So, an infantry, as a type of army, is accessible only for well-organized countries, like Roman Empire, Netherlands during William of Orange times, or 16th century France. Only such kind of countries could organize well-trained infantry armies, as supplying an infantry army was very expensive. Cavalry, on other hand, while still more expensive if we compare warriors one-to-one, but much less expensive if we are talking about overall supplies, because size of a cavalry army is much smaller. If we will look at earlier Middle Ages, for example 10th century, we will realize that a knight of those time did not cost a penny to his country because knights were supplying themselves with all needed equipment. They were given a land, with peasants, which was used to generate an income to cover all equipment expenses, and they were obligated to provide a military service to their feudal suzerain in exchange of using those land. They were obligated to self-supply weapons, equipment, horses, servants and squires, who were also mounted warriors. Taking this into account, cavalry did not cost a penny during those times. Going back to 16th to 17th centuries, we once again realize that to supply an organized infantry army, you should keep giant stocks of arms and ammunition. Because instead of 600 horsemen that used to solve all the possible military tasks, you eventually must supply 5,000 infantrymen, which require armor, all kind of fabrics for clothes, huge amount of wood and steel for weapons, food, and salary for each individual infantryman. That's why we don't see an organized infantry armies for almost 1,000 years after crash of Roman Empire, when European countries could catch up with economical state of Roman Empire of 3rd to 5th century BC. Disregarding all the drawbacks with cost of properly trained infantry unit, infantry became great power in Middle Ages. Speaking about infantry performance on the battlefield, you may have heard of battles, which were won by infantry against cavalry. There were many cases when infantry has been victorious, and taking that into account, one may think that cavalry became obsolete in Middle Ages. However, that was not the case, and here's why. Even well-organized infantry can only win a battle, but can't achieve a strategic victory over an enemy force, because it can't maneuver rapidly. If you have a great infantry that is able to break enemy orders, and put enemy to flight, it won't be able to chase an enemy, and it won't be able to take much prisoners of war because of that. The only unit type that would be able to accomplish such a task would be cavalry. Therefore, each good and balanced army had to have both infantry and cavalry. Infantry provided stability on a battlefield, and cavalry used to perform a strategic maneuver. First time this perfect balance has been achieved, Macedonians conquered all lands starting from Greece and ending in Egypt and North India. The reason for such a victorious march is a fact that they had a great organized heavy infantry and numerous well-armed and well-trained cavalry. But that's another story, which we may discuss in future. We've discussed several interesting, medieval infantry-related topics today, and understood some aspects of medieval infantry armies. Please leave your comments below this video, so we will know whether to make more videos about medieval military topics, which would help to better understand upcoming Veggies farm PvP mode. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Veggies Farm Game channel.